Hello, my name is Brittany Deigh. I am a psychic medium and spiritual teacher. My divine purpose is to assist in the expansion of the collective consciousness and to help you become more connected with the divine. This is a space to remember all that you truly are and ignite the possibilities of your highest potential. All right. So, my journey with addiction, oh my goodness. I am actually in the process of recording like an in-depth life story journey. And I actually I've gotten several readings throughout my life where, the reader would say that I was going to write a book about my story. And I'd be like, what could I possibly write a book about? Now I'm like, Brittany, what? You have such an in-depth life story. Like, what do you mean? Like every time that happened, I'm like, I'm going to write a book. Now that makes absolute and total sense. And I think that the podcast of my life story is going to be just beginning to dabble with, that in-depth story of my life. But this episode is more just to give you a kind of a little bit of a background of my journey with addiction. So we have my mom and my dad's side, right? And my mom was raised into she was in a very, very, very strict religious, hyper-religious family. Every Wednesday night, every Sunday morning, everything revolved around the Bible and their religion. And it's really interesting because I knew that there had to be some connection to that, like, hyper-religious household to an addicted household, because all of my mom and all of her siblings all married addicts. And I'm like, there's gotta be something to this. Like, there's no way that's a coincidence that these, my mom and her siblings all got themselves into these twisted, tied situations with deep, like, serious addiction. And so I recently found out actually that growing up in a extremely, religious household, you have the same hypervigilance as growing up in an addicted household. And so basically you're just like on eggshells and you're like on edge and like constantly like, oh, am I doing the right thing or am I sinning, And so it's a very similar energy, a very similar vibration, a very similar hypersensitivity that you develop as to growing up in an addicted household. And so that's my dad's side. My dad grew up with deep addiction in his family, in his blood. All of his brothers and sisters have been addicted, whether it's substance abuse or some other type of addiction. His dad, passed from alcoholism, and so did his brother. My Uncle Russell died from an overdose, and my dad died from an overdose. And then all of the children from my dad's brothers and sisters, all of those siblings, all have dealt with addiction. Pretty much all of us. I don't know any of us that haven't dealt with addiction, at least at some point in some form. And it's a very, very deep spiritual illness on my dad's side. It's definitely, there is some on my mom's side, but it's deep on my dad's side. And a lot of them are in recovery now, which is really good. Whether that's like actively healing their trauma or just not using substances. Either way, they're at least not abusing their body with substances anymore. I would say for the most part, everybody. And so as a descendant of my father, my brother and I both suffered from addiction. But my brother, it really hit him a lot harder than I think that it hit me. And his first overdose was whenever he was 13. And it was just like from that point on, absolute and total chaos. And you're always worried, if you were going to find him overdosed and dead. And so growing up in that all of the time, and my mom had her, she has her own addictions as well, with alcohol. And so sometimes whenever she didn't have the tools to handle, the intensity of what we were dealing with as a family or in her own life or with Dan, she turns to alcohol, and then it creates more issues, right? So, and then I had a spout. I was addicted to marijuana and alcohol, and then I had a spout with Adderall as well in my teens. I got I started smoking weed whenever I was 13 years old. And it was really just like to be accepted, and drinking alcohol. But mostly smoking weed. I started like wearing tie-dye and like listening to the same music as my brother, and like just really wanting to connect with him. 'Cause I felt so disconnected in my family. And so I was just trying to find something that we could connect on, really. And weed, he was a big weed dealer, and was really into drugs and stuff. So the first time I got high was with my brother, and then I started, smoking weed and kind of becoming like a hippie, and trying to listen to the same music and be just like him. And then I smoked weed a lot. I got to a point in my life actually where I couldn't sleep through the night without, that's whenever I grew weed out in California, like a huge farm, 200 plus plants on a 365 acre farm. And that's whenever I was smoking like 8 to 10 joints a day, just staying in a nonstop, like numbing haze. And I would even wake up in the middle of the night. I actually completely forgot about that until I was recently talking with my partner that I was previously with at that time, my previous partner. And she told me, she was like, yeah, man, I was telling her about how I was getting sober and this and that. She was like, yeah, man, I remember like, you used to like not even be able to sleep at night. Like I would wake up and these like, the trauma, these dreams and different things would happen. And then I would like wake up and just like hit a fucking fat bowl and then go back to sleep. And so it was like, no matter anytime any of my feelings or anything tried to surface, it was like too intense for me to experience. So I would just get high all the time. And the Adderall really came from, I started taking birth control whenever I was in high school, and then I put on, the birth control just did not work well with my body, and I put on like 40 pounds in like 3 months, and I was like, fuck this shit, I know that this is what it is. And so I stopped taking my birth control, and then I kind of had this mentality of like, oh, well, if I'm already taking these pills and they make me fat, then let me take these pills. My friend told me that if I took Adderall, I wouldn't be hungry and I would lose a lot of weight, and it worked. And I actually developed eating disorders. I started, being bulimic and like throwing up everything that I did eat, so that way I would keep losing weight. My original intention was to just get all that extra weight that I had put on off. But then of course it went way further than that, to a point where I was literally skin and bones, and I was like up all night long. And I just kept telling my mom that I was like really into like my art project or whatever it was, or I wanted to get an A. I was like studying all night long, and I would literally for weeks on it. It actually lasted months, but my mom picked up on it for a few weeks. But I was addicted, I would say, for like 3 or 4 months. And it originally started with me just like taking, like I would like, split it up and like just take it. And then I remembered my brother, he told me one time whenever I was, hanging out with him, that if you crush it up and you snort it, you get more like bang for your buck. Like you'll get more out of the pill. It'll hit you harder. And so then I started snorting the Adderall. And actually the girl that I was getting my Adderall from was allergic to, like it wasn't the plastic one that had all the beads in it. She actually had the hard pills, and it literally said across the bottle amphetamine. Yeah, amphetamine salts is what it was. So it was like literally snorting meth. And then I would be up all night till like 3 or 4 a.m. doing homework and working on projects or whatever it was, cleaning my room or whatever it was. And then I would go to sleep for like an hour or two and then get up for school at like 6:30 the next day. And I was smoking weed at the time too. So it was like, I was like constantly up and down and up and down and up and down. And then I ended up going to rehab that was my junior year over winter break. My mom was like, nah, I already lost your dad. I already lost your brother. I'm not losing you to this thing too. And so then she called the police. Actually, she told me she was going to take me to rehab, and I was like, hell no, I'm running away. I started to pack my shit. And then she actually called the police, and then they brought an ambulance to my house and they took me to rehab. And I remember the first like 2 or 3 days in rehab, I was like literally going through withdrawals. I was like, my head was banging and I was so exhausted. Like it was like the last 4 months of like not sleeping for like 4 months straight just like hit me like a ton of bricks over those like 3 days. And my body, I was just sick. Oh God, I hated it. I honestly still to this day, like I hated rehab. It was horrible. I felt like I was locked in a jail, and I was like, yeah, coloring I was 17 years old, and like we would spend like an hour and a half a day. You know, we would do like gym class where you'd play basketball and then you'd like color in these little like coloring, you know, like little puppies on, like with crowns. Like I was like, oh my God, what is my life right now? And I did end up picking the Adderall back up after that, but I just really kept it under control. And then eventually I got to a point where this was not serving me. I started really getting in trouble in school for selling. And I actually one time my mom was she was having some troubles with work and stuff. And so she actually left, and she lived in New Jersey while I was in high school, and she would like randomly come home for like the weekend or whatever. She would fly in and come home for the weekend. But I like had an entire house to myself in my teens. And that's when it really got out of control. My house was just like a pop factory, basically. I was just like always blowing down. The whole house was always full of smoke. People were always coming by. And it was so utterly obvious to everyone, you know, that I was selling. Obviously, I was on a main road, you know. It was like I was a teenager. Like I was not laying low. And I think that my neighbor reported me, and the cops came to my house one night and at like 3 a.m. and they raided my house. Thank God. I have no idea how this happened, but I had put everything up. I swear it was just my intuition. I put everything up. I put my safe up with all my money. I put my bong up in this little case thing and like tucked it underneath my office desk. All of my jars were packed away, and like it was one of those warrants where like they could only walk around. They couldn't like tear shit apart because they didn't have, it was just like someone calling in or whatever. They didn't have like a warrant to like tear my house apart. And I remember I had just come home from a vacation, and I sold a bunch of, I think it was spring break or something, and I had sold a bunch of shit on vacation, but I had a bunch of it left over in my suitcase, and my suitcase was still zipped on my floor. Now, if that suitcase wasn't zipped, they would have had the legal right to flip it open, and all of the shit would have just been there open. I mean, it was insane. I skated by not going to fucking jail that night. And they were like, where's your mom? Because I was sleeping in my mom's room because her bed was more comfy. And I was like, she's at her boyfriend's house or something. But that's whenever it was like, okay, this is, you living in a different state is not working. And so I actually ended up getting in trouble. I got caught on camera. This girl got caught with the Adderall that I had sold her. I made the mistake of selling it to her in school. And so they had me on video handing it to her in the hallway, and her story matched what was on video. And so then I got suspended, and then I lost my, my scholarship to college. I wanted to play college lacrosse, and all of the schools that I had applied to, once I had that on my record, like they're like, we can't do a drug offense and you be one of our, collegiate athletes. And so I did end up being able to go to school and play lacrosse, but I had to go to the only school that had already processed all of my stuff. And, And so they had my previous record that didn't have any drug offenses on there, on file. And the coach of that collegiate team actually came to my senior game or whatever. She came there to support me and for my lacrosse game, because I was also the captain. It was my senior year. And she was like asking the team, she's like, "Where's Brittany?" And they're all like, "Oh, you don't know, like she's suspended, like she's kicked off the team." Like, and I was so, God, it hurts so. That out of all of the things with that Adderall spout, other than the rehab sucked. Missing my lacrosse game. Lacrosse was my world, and not being able to play in like the final game, like it's like the senior night game, on my final year playing. It broke me. That really broke me. And I think it was a big reason why I wanted to play collegiate lacrosse, even though I didn't like the school. I felt like I had ruined my lacrosse career and I didn't want it to end like that. And so I went to play in college, but my addiction still ran the show. I was still smoking hella weed and drinking and numbing, and I actually got caught with weed inside. It wasn't even my weed, guys, but you're hanging out with the people. I got caught with weed. This guy that I drove a big car of us back to Louisville for the weekend, and he got arrested on the way home. I got pulled over, and he had a warrant for his arrest. And so he went to jail in Louisville, and we all continued back to Pikeville. And I had all of his stuff, and instead of leaving it in my car, I brought it into my room, that was a bad mistake. And they searched my room, and I didn't realize that he had weed in a bowl in his bag. And so then, of course, they're looking at me, but it clearly was someone else's bag. It was like a dude's bag. It was the same coach that already knew that I had a drug offense in high school. And, she sat me down and she's like, "Brittany, like, we can't do this, And I still did not get sober. I couldn't. Even when I tried, I couldn't. And so, yeah. And I also, like, I had this thing my senior year. Listen how interesting this guy's. I had this like goal that I would smoke an entire blunt every night before I would go to bed. The biggest bowl that I had in my arsenal, I would smoke before I went into school every day my senior year. And if I woke up late and I like didn't have time to smoke, like I'm barely like, scraping by, getting my clothes on and brushing my teeth or whatever, get myself together to go, I would literally be late for school just to smoke a bowl. Like every single day of my senior year, it was like this devotional commitment to me and my addiction that I would not go to school sober. I couldn't. Or at least I felt that way at the time. And so, yeah, within my own addiction, moving beyond that, I drank so much in college to the point that I was drinking while I was at work. Like it became just like weed. Like I would bring it in like a little water bottle to my work and stuff. And it wasn't even like I was like sloshed, you could smell the alcohol on me, but it was more like, it was just like a little numbing. It was just keeping the sensations and keeping the feelings numbed. And, then whenever I went through a huge awakening whenever I was 19, and I sold all my shit and I let go of everything and I went to go travel, and I realized like I was really living a really toxic life, and I was like, I want to restart. Let's press the reset button and we're restarting. And of course my addictions followed me. I thought that I was, and I did. It was a huge restart for me, and I shed a lot of my, like my hoarding and my holding on to everything, and it creating safety for me, like things that I had since I was in middle school, and just, yeah, like a lot of my addictions, I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, but now looking back, I'm like, oh, that was like another cycle of like the liberating myself from this illness. It was a spiritual awakening. And so, in doing so, my addictions ended up creeping up on me again. That's whenever I ended up at the pot farm in California, in NorCal. And then right back to, and honestly, like, I don't really think, because one of the first states that I hit whenever I was traveling was Colorado. And at that time, I'm sure it's a little bit better now, but at that time it had just become legalized like the year before, and potheads were just flocking to Colorado, right? And it was so justified. Everyone was like, it was actually like cool to literally smoke all day, every day, and do nothing other than work and smoke weed. And so that really activated. And then the place I went after was California. And then that's whenever we started growing weed. And then I had pounds and pounds and pounds of weed. And then I start, freaking driving them across the country, selling 10, 20, 30 pounds at a time. And it was typically, I wouldn't say every time, but it was typically always me that was the driver for the farm, because I'm like pretty white girl, proper, can get like my stuff, act like, ooh, and it was just the stereotypical, easiest scapegoat to not go to jail. The pretty high class white girl is not as likely to go to jail. And so I pretty much always played that role and became the hauler of a lot of the weed across the country, and then it became dabs and all of the things. And so that was a huge, huge, huge chapter. And then whenever I went through my spiritual awakening, I actually stopped doing all drugs, all alcohol, became completely sober, not even recognizing that that's what I was doing whenever I went through my Kundalini awakening when I was 25. And I didn't smoke for 7 months, but I was on a spiritual high. So once I started coming down from my spiritual high, that's whenever I started picking up weed again, drinking alcohol again. And then it kind of became a norm for me to just be high anytime, find me in the bathtub, listening to music, finishing a bottle of wine in one night, especially if I was not having a great day. And yeah, so then whenever I got pregnant, that's when I really realized that it was a problem, because I didn't think that it would be a problem at all, because I had already quit for 7 months. I was like, okay, 9 months, no big deal. I've already done this. But the difference is that I didn't go through a, Kundalini awakening, which if you're interested in that story at all, just check out my episode, The Moment That Your Life Changed, the moment that my life changed. That's my very first episode on, my podcast. And so, it wasn't like this God realized moment where my third eye blasts open and I'm like, peaking this spiritual high. Being pregnant actually really grounded me into this earth experience. I was creating an earth baby inside of me. So I was super grounded, super in my body. And then all of this trauma that I had experienced in the earth plane and in this life cycle really started to come forward. And I suffered from antenatal depression. I actually was suicidal at one point in my pregnancy, for the first time in my life ever. Not suicidal ever in my life, but ever did I call the suicide hotline. I'd never been that broken, at least not in my adulthood. And And I didn't know what else to do other than, especially whenever I was suffering from the nausea in the beginning of my pregnancy, smoking weed was the only thing that helped me. And I was spiraling out, in depression and losing myself. I couldn't even brush my teeth. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't take care of myself. And honestly, the ganj was the only thing that was helping me. I never drank during my pregnancy, but I definitely smoked. And I know that really where it shifted was because this medicine did serve me. It did numb me and help me survive during a chapter of my life where, with my brother's addiction for 15 years, he went through opanas and heroin and all the different, pretty much anything he could get his hands on, overdosing all the time. We were always worried about, Dan dying, and he spent 5 years in prison. That was very intense of an experience. Even in visiting him, you're literally treated like a prisoner yourself. And it was just a lot, all the time. And so I recognize that in order to survive, in order to not spiral out and actually take my own life, I think that smoking and being and drinking and all of those things, they did genuinely help me to survive and to stay alive and to numb what was too much to experience. But whenever I was pregnant, and I genuinely desired to not smoke and to not put anything in my body that I knew could even potentially be harmful to my baby. And I still couldn't. I went 7 weeks. I stopped smoking the day that I found out. And then I went 7 weeks. And it was right after my first appointment. I thought maybe they might drug test me in my first appointment. And right after my first appointment, I'm just driving to get home to hit a freaking bowl. And then I'm hiding it from everybody. And I'm secretly going in my car and going upstairs and just hiding the fact that I'm even smoking and getting high from everybody. I'm sure it was probably obvious because the addict always thinks that they're slick, but it's everyone can see that you're fucking stoned right now, dude. But it was when I realized that I really was trying to not smoke and I still couldn't not do it. That's when I knew there was a problem here. And so I recently decided to get sober in all of the ways there are to get sober, more than just the substance abuse, becoming radically authentic and real and transparent and raw and open and fully myself in this life, true sobriety, was a recent feat that I went through. And there's an entire episode about the night that I got sober. And so that's pretty much where we're at now. And I'm sharing this journey with you guys and hopefully creating a space for other people that grew up in addicted households, in abuse and neglect, and other addicts that have walked the path. I know a lot of people think that you're just getting sober from weed. It's not that big of a deal. And it's that's really belittling because I really genuinely struggle with this. I really struggle with numbing myself. It doesn't really matter what I'm numbing myself with, to be honest. I struggle with using a substance to numb from my own authentic, genuine experience, which is addiction. So I'm getting sober in all of the ways there is, and I'm breaking the generational curse for myself and my children, my child that I currently have and any that I may have in the future. And we're gonna be done with this once and for all. My family is not going to continue to suffer the cycle, at least to the best of my ability. My family, my line will not suffer suffer the cycle of needing to numb themselves with something outside of themselves in order to get by. We're not getting by anymore. I'm not doing the survival thing anymore. We're thriving, and my family will thrive. And that is exactly what this journey is. It is uncovering everything that is keeping you from being in your most authentic, truest, most honest, genuine state of being. And that's what I'm doing here. So I'm going to share more about my journey in depth. I'm in the middle of recording a very deep, long life journey with addiction, and just growing up, especially growing up with it. My dad, passing from an overdose and how that affected my life, my brother, and his addiction, and, just always worried about him killing himself and overdosing and dying. My mom and her alcoholism, and in the ways that she abuses alcohol, to help her with her feelings, and how that affected me, and just growing up in that. And I'm sharing. There's gonna be a lot, and there's a lot to come in my life story, and I don't know if I'll ever end up fully sharing it on this podcast. We'll see. But I do know that it's being recorded, and I'm definitely, one thing I do know is that I will be writing a book about my life journey as a whole, and especially a lot of it is with trauma, abuse, neglect, and addiction. So keep sticking around, guys. Thank you guys so much for being here, and I hope that you tune in for the next episode. Much love. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed that episode. Please subscribe, leave a review, and if this was impactful for you at all, please share it with others. This is how we can help each other. Much love and namaste.